our presenters. We have Ann O'Brien, who's an English instructor here at CCC Online, and Carol Kramer, who's a math instructor at CCC Online. And they're going to be discussing enhancing discussions for developmental courses. So take it away, guys.
All right, welcome everybody. This is Carol Kramer speaking, and with me I have Ann O'Brien. And we're going to start our presentation. And I'm going to go right into one of the preview questions was if you wondered about what other students or other teachers do in their classes. So we're going to give you just a quick overview of a couple of math discussions and a typical English discussion, and then we'll get into the purpose of our discussions in any class for online. So right here I have overview of discussions for math. And I've taught several developmental math courses with CCC Online. We had it structured so there are several classes, and now our current structure is just 2 classes for developmental math. Some of the types of questions you'll see in a math discussion we usually have a questions discussion, which is always open, where students can post questions on the current work that they're working on. Do a screenshot of a question that they were stumped on, just ask a general question. So we always have one of those open. And then the questions or the discussions that they're actually graded on are typically a solve a problem. We might have a muddy and clear concept, exploring an aspect of the course, such as the study plan, which takes me to my math lab, and it will have math work that's all individualized to that student. They may have to explain a concept on their own, or create a math problem, or maybe find applications of what we're working on in the real world and explain that. For math, minimum posts needed for an A grade, the minimum is usually 2 posts, usually an initial thread, and then at least 1 meaningful reply to another student. But many students need at least 1 revision, so I would say that most students that get an A grade have at least 3 posts. The skills that we require in the math discussions are the ability to explain math with typed text. Math is a lot easier to write on paper than it is on a computer, so that's a skill that we actually teach with the discussions. Showing math steps with the equation editor, explaining math work with written words. So typically if they post a question, we also have them explain their work with written sentences also. So there's kind of the math work and then the written explanation with their post. And then they often have to do screenshots of their computer screen, maybe to post a problem or post a picture or a graph. They have to be able to navigate the discussion in the course, and then they have to have the ability to edit the material, to go back through and change something, maybe for a revision. And then just making sure that they do spell check and other discussion tools. Because yes, even in math, we do want them to come across well. And if they don't have good spelling or poor grammar, then it's hard to explain yourself if you don't have those things. So we do emphasize those as well. I'm going to go to the next screen. Just wanted to give you a sample of some math directions for a math discussion. So you are aware, especially if you teach something other than math. This is an example from about 2/3 of the way through the course. So an overview at this point in our course, we've covered more than 2/3 of the content. Let's talk about what you get and what still puzzles you. And this was our muddy and clear concept discussion. And your original thread should include your muddiest point, that topic, problem, or concept that continues to elude you. And then number 2, a concept or topic that you really get. And then number 3 follows that with an example of the concept and or topic you really get. So they have to show a problem, the solution, and a written explanation. The example should be selected from each the numbered problems in our e-text, and they'll likely use the equation editor. So with that, they often will post what they don't understand, and then something that they do understand. And when I reply their muddiest point, I usually try to pick a problem and explain it a little bit further, thinking that they're probably not the only student that didn't understand that very well, and then just making sure that they explain their topic that they understood well and maybe if needed, I might ask them to revise something or explain a certain part. And then with every math discussion, almost all of them, they also have to reply to another student, a meaningful reply, more than that was great, but trying to pick something out of the post from another student and replying back to that, maybe asking another question or elaborating or writing a tip down, something like that. So with that, that's just a quick overview of math. And I'm going to turn this over to Anne now, and she's going to give you an overview of discussions.
Hi, everybody. Can you all hear me? If not, put an SOS in. So the discussions in English are very different from math. You know, there are things, though, that are the same. The ability to type your response and your post accurately, that you've really thought through what is being expected, that sort of thing. But I find that in English, it's difficult because they're using the language, and they can either use the language to go deep, or they can use the language to just stay on the surface. And that's my biggest challenge. Superficiality is my enemy in English. So I have three discussions that I would like to talk about. The first one is discussion 4.1, the Bennett chapters 7 through 9. And I'm going to try to share my screen here. Oops. Okay. Okay, you should all be able to see that. So discussion 4.1 is Bennett chapters 7, 8, and 9. So I got permission from Beth to make a few changes in this discussion because I felt like the responses were really superficial, and I was having a hard time getting students to go deeper. So I gave one question from each chapter and asked them to respond to 2 of the questions. So the first one was quotes from Epictetus, who's a Greek philosopher. And I wanted them to read the quotes and to make a comment about why Bennett might have used these as worthwhile reading material. And then the second question related to go down further, passage from chapter 8, which is I found very challenging and very English and very old. So I wanted them to really look into that passage and tell me what was the main idea and why is he selecting this particular passage as a way of asking his readers to practice, and then how does the passage relate to them. And I don't believe anybody chose this. Maybe one person might have. And then the favorite question was the one from chapter 9. And there's a quote, "The gulf that separates a French horn from an English horn, and you would perceive a player of a hautboy gets higher wages than that of a fiddler." So it's like Greek to me. But by going to Google and looking up these things, I could see exactly what the deal was. And that's what I wanted them to do. And also relate that back to the importance of appreciating orchestral music and how knowing these things might help. So in this discussion, then, they were discovering, they were processing, and they were applying information, which is a quote that you will see later on in this presentation that I've really latched onto as a way of questioning whether I'm being successful and they're being successful. If they're not discovering something, if they're not processing information, and if they're not applying it, then, you know, we got to go back to the drawing board here. So that is my first discussion. Now I have to go back. Well, I think I'll go through all of them right now. So the second one, oh, I know what I have to do. I have to go back to the list. So the second one in the list is the 5.2 writing workshop where they were reading the information on the argumentative essay and then also doing a research assignment, choosing topics and evaluating sources. And lastly, then responding to their classmates, discussing the pros and cons of their topic choices and the rest of it. So basically, the bottom line was use this discussion to perfect your research assignment. It is due in the Dropbox at da-da-da. So what I found with this is that this discussion has many steps. They have to go back, they have to do their research, they have to talk about their sources, they have to then, let's see, hold on, why the sources are valuable, and would that an essay that has these sources be convincing to you, why or why not? And so they're asking a lot of the poster, but they're also asking a lot of the person who's going to reply. So what I've discovered is that because there are so many steps involved, if the students miss any part of that process, then their work in the Dropbox is not going to be successful. So that's a huge issue for me, and I'm still struggling with how to manage this discussion because we basically, they did not really discuss pros and cons and of the sources, and they didn't really relate to whether the essay would be convincing. I think it was a little too deep, so I think there's work in between that I have to do to make them know that this is absolutely critical. It's the second to the last essay, and it's a very critical one. So there's that one, and then I have one more. And this one I included because this was the most fun workshop, I thought. And then the second one would be the process one with the essay about Gabby Giffords. So this one here was they had to post the work they had done, the graphic organizer, and the paragraph assignment. So they had 4 items they were posting to the Dropbox. And by the way, this one I had to write and tell them it's not the dog ate my flash drive, it's both of the essays on multitasking. And so what I found in this responses to this question was because they had background knowledge and because a lot of them are very savvy with technology, they could come to a good understanding of which one they approved of. Did they want to really ratchet down multitasking, or did they feel like that's the only thing that's worthwhile in this world? And this is where I got some very meaningful responses, and students really communicated to one another. So what that said to me is I really have to work to make all of the discussions as good as I can make them. So now I'm going back to, okay. So, oops, do I have the ball? I can't seem to get it to go to my next slide. Well, I talked about all the discussions, but I would say that to me, what's the most important thing in my, first of all of you who've taught this new English class know that it's much more challenging, especially in 10 weeks, but it's also really closely matched to the work that they're going to be doing. And so it's really important that they participate in order to do well on their assignments. And what I found is if they don't post the complete information, I remind them in the discussion. But if they have done something that it might be embarrassing for them to know that, I do email them because I don't ever want to embarrass them. And when I'm responding to them, I try to praise what they've done well and to suggest what they could do better. Because I think a lot of these learners are at risk in terms of really being able to listen to what a teacher says without considering it, that it's criticism. And so I would say that's the thing I work the hardest on. So I'm going to turn it back to Carol, and if you have any questions, please post them.
discussion. So if everyone, if you can see that screen, I think everyone should be on the same screen that says purpose of discussion and why we have discussions. And we are, oops.
Oh, I'm sorry, this was my slide. I'm sorry. Okay, thanks. So you're going to pass me the ball, right? So one of the conditions of teaching online classes, if you're a reliable institution, is that you include discussions. And the reasons are pretty easy to figure out. It's a way for the students and instructor to interact in regard to assigned tasks, to encourage, model, and teach college-level discourse and ability to explain thoughts, and to help the student's thinking process grow from more concrete to more critical. And I think this last one is really a biggie for me, because you do get people who are not there yet at that level where they can think more critically, and there's not much that you can do to make it change right away. You have to keep working with them to do that. And one of the ways that they learn is watching what other students produce and seeing, oh, wow, think about this. And they don't always comment on it, but it's one of the ways that they can grow. Encouragement, really very significant. And the rest, I think you really know well, but I would say this last one, the thinking and growing more critical to see more abstract thinking, is absolutely critical. So, Carol, I'm going to go back to you.
For this slide, purpose of discussions, unfortunately my PowerPoint cut off most of this, but the discussions from quality matters, which is a way to kind of assess your online courses to see if they meet the needs of students and the rigor of the course. The discussion should support and enhance your course objectives. And then in this, it also talks about that students should be doing something, that they should be not just replying back to something, but maybe that they had to read something, they had to put forth some thought using higher levels of Bloom taxonomy, and using some open-ended questions where there's not just one answer, but there's several answers. So we want to keep that into our discussions also. And this one's for Anne, and she's going to go over this.
So I would say that this little quote here is like so important, because if the students don't know the purpose of the discussion, then how are you going to get quality work other than, you know, for their point of view, they get the points. So I've been thinking about the question of, well, how do we let them know why we have discussions? And it's more than just putting it in your remarks when the course class starts, or, you know, sending them emails. I think it's the way you respond to them in their work, like how you tell them that, boy, it's really good what you've done here, but see if you can add a little bit more, and that will help us to understand, you know, why you've chosen this topic or why these resources are important to you. And it's something that just has to keep going and going, because they won't necessarily get it that, gee, their grade is low because they didn't do the work and participate in the discussion. So to me, this is really, really super important. And the other thing is, because the discussions are worth 10 points in the English and reading and composition, is, you know, that's not an incentive for them to participate. So I realize that I have to work a lot harder and do email reminders or pep talks in the middle to really get them to respond. And I'm not sure how to get this blue box up here, because I want to get to the rest of it. But basically, we need to communicate the importance of the class interaction and collaboration in many ways. one of the ways I do it is through the way I comment on their participation in discussions, and I try to be as specific as I can so that they will, you know, understand what is acceptable and what isn't. And to me, it's not that much about the grade. It's about moving them forward. The reinforcing of understanding of the module content is another thing that when they interact with others and they see what others do well, you know, they begin to get it. And also what I say to them, I hope help. And in the idea of academic discourse, you know, it doesn't happen on day one. I finally got it into my thick skull that they move along a curve. And so by the end of this class, if they have an inkling that there's a certain way that in an academic environment that you discuss things, you don't like shoot down other people, you say things in a diplomatic manner, but you disagree in a diplomatic manner. And I'm so worried when I don't see those behaviors, and then I realize, you know, they're developing it, and at least they've seen it, and when they get to the next course, maybe they'll remember some of what we did. So, and then we're asking you to input into the chat your issues or problems that you've had.
Especially with working with developmental students, there's several challenges that I think we've all come across with discussions in particular. And we're going to have our ideas on the next slide, but we wanted to give you a chance to just go into chat. And if you could send it to all attendees, and just click on the chat and then just type in a challenge that you have had with the discussion. You might think about timeliness, where they kind of end up, how they start the discussion. And I'm hoping we get a couple in here too.
Carol, yes, I wanted to add, do I have a...
Go for it.
Okay, so I wanted to add that in the discussions, especially the writing workshop and also the reading workshops, where how well they do is going to impact their grade in the Dropbox. Letting them understand that, you know, and I try to use the word success a lot, is really, really critical, I think. And I'm trying to find more ways besides input that I give them in their grades, input I give them in the Dropbox, and emails I send them when things really go off the track. Thank you. On to you, Carol.
Okay. And one comment from Mary Sokol, thank you, is replying to their responders. And I do see that a lot. I know when I have a student that actually replies to the person that replied to them, and they did a good job, then I'm pretty sure that student gets it. So that is an important one. And then some other things that have come up was some of the students only want to interact with just the instructor, but not another student. And so we try to answer with the whole class, and I think that's a good strategy because there are students that want the online experience because they don't want to deal with other students. So sometimes we have to encourage them into working with other students also. Re-engaging the tips in class, we're going to get to some ideas for that in a little bit. That might involve maybe a personal email to different students. It might be an email to all students. I know I've done email to all students, like I would love to see this more in the discussion, and maybe give a couple questions they could put in. And then participation of less confident students. Sometimes that's a phone call or an email, but that's always something that we need to work on and try to get those students. And that could be from where they're coming from. There could be a lot of reasons why they're not confident in the course. It could just be it's their first online course. And then another one that someone posted was last-minute posts, very poor grammar, and students may skip discussion assignments altogether. And I know Anne mentioned that she had 10-point assignments, and in math we used to have, or for discussions, and in math we used to have a lower point. We actually assigned higher points to the discussions to try to encourage students more to participate in them and to also show that they were a little more valuable. So sometimes it's how the course is set up, and you might talk to your program lead if you think that the discussions are appropriately pointed or not, because sometimes it's the points. And I know I've had students that didn't participate in discussions and then they earned a grade lower because of that. In this slide, this is kind of what Anne and I discussed a lot when we were asked to do this webinar, and we think about developmental students. I'm going to look at the left side first, and with our developmental students, there's usually a large difference in their ages and how long the students have been away from school. Some of them are maybe co-taking classes in high school and college, and some people have been out of school for 20 or more years. And there's differences in agility with grammar and spelling. I think especially in community college level, and especially with the developmental courses, some of them are pretty good with their grammar and spelling, and others are, but we'll just say they need a little bit of work in that area. And there's also a big difference in the ability to think critically. Some students kind of have some of those higher order thinking skills, and some students are very concrete, and we're trying to build those concrete students up to thinking a little bit more. And their work ethic and skills are low. Not all students, but there are definitely some students that are not following along with the timelines, not getting all their assignments in, and maybe they're doing those last-minute quotes. And then last but not least, students procrastinate. And having taught several different levels of students and ages, we always have that group of students, I think, no matter where you're teaching. But for how this shows up in discussions, now I'm looking at the right side, and we have with the differences in ages and how long students have been away from school, that really affects their familiarity with online courses. Sometimes they don't know how to navigate, and that's what's keeping them away from doing the discussions well. So maybe they just need a little bit of help via an email or something along those lines, or a phone call to help them understand how to manage the online discussions. Differences in agility with grammar and spelling. Some students will post a thread that it's hard to read due to multiple errors, and one of our participants brought that up too. And that is difficult because you want it to come across well. And sometimes, if you don't want to embarrass the students, that might be an email, just an individual email. I found your post hard to read. I would suggest, and then copying their post, maybe highlighting a few of the words. I often use colors, so I might copy their post in an email and then highlight the parts that I thought were confusing and ask them to maybe elaborate on that, or do spell check and change the wording. And I think as some of our developmental students come in, we have to teach them that they need to write how it should be written, and not maybe what they would say, but write in a way that's a little more collegiate level than maybe like text, and try to avoid those. And then differences in ability to think critically. Some students, especially with that concrete, the posts such as good posts or good example, and they reply to somebody else where they have just a very minimal amount of words or sentences, and you can just look at their post with the length and know they need more. So it's trying to get those students to revise. And then work ethic and skills low. That kind of goes back to when students don't reply to other people that reply to them, or they only post once, or you reply back to them and ask them to elaborate on something or revise, and they don't check back to the discussion. They did one thing and they call that good. And then students procrastinate. It's very typical, I think, in most discussions that a lot of people will try to post at the last second, but that kind of nullifies the chance for a discussion with online, because we need that time to see their original post and then also be able to reply back to them. So one suggestion we have for that is making sure there's a due date maybe for their first post, halfway in between, not having everything due at the end. So if you have any, we're going to go over some ways to adjust those challenges in a few minutes, but we did want to just check real quick here and make sure there weren't any questions. And if not, then we'll just move on. But if you have a question, maybe you can hit the little hand that's underneath the participant list and then type it in, and then we'll know it's coming. But if you have any questions, just type it in, and we'll be happy to answer those as we go.
Carol?
Yes.
Carol? I would like to respond to some of the things on the previous page, if that's okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Let's look at the text.
So, from Nancy, when you have a person, and this sort of runs, people do this, they post their initial post, then they never come back. So they don't respond to other people, and they don't get responses. I addressed that in the, when I grade them, the comments, and I just say, well, I'm disappointed that it, you know, things like that to encourage them and make them realize it's important that they participate. But there are students who just don't do that, and I find that a lot of those students are the students that don't succeed in the course because they don't get assignments in either. And then Mary had a question about what discussions are worth. I mean, my personal opinion is that I think they should be worth more than 10 points because they're so critical to student success in the latest course that's been designed, which is very tightly knit and everything fits together. So, but that's really not a question I can't answer without speaking out of turn. From Rick, language is a big issue for new students, texting habits, and I really agree with that, and there's other ones about, you know, students badly written. So those, I try to address that again in my grading. That's not something I can address publicly, although in the beginning I let them know that I am going to be grading, you know, their writing skills, their grammar. And there was another one, oh, the last minute pose. Oh, this one here, this is a biggie from Rick. Many students give answers and just throw in filler to meet the word requirements. And how many times have English teachers figured that one out, and it's really, really annoying. And I find that people who have more facility with the language are the worst people. And so that's really difficult, but I always write back and ask them to please elaborate on a particular thing. So I think that was all that I wanted to weigh in on. Again, I use the feedback in the grading as a way to really give them information, but also sending them emails if they don't post and we really need them to participate. Back to you, Carol.
And with our individual students, sometimes we just need to treat them like individuals. I think that really helps. And maybe a personal email or a personal call would really help students. Because not everyone is probably having the same problem, but when you see a student having those grammar issues or not answering the question right, maybe an individual email would be appropriate. So just kind of remember that we can post our general directions, but we still need to deal with our students as individuals, and sometimes that can help us get past some of those issues at least a little bit. We at least want to see growth. I mean, we're not going to have a student that starts out by texting necessarily be posting this ideal post that we want to put in our other classes as an example, but we can at least move them along. So also remember to look at growth and where they were at the beginning of the semester, and sometimes that helps keep us in perspective also. Anne's going to weigh in on this slide also, but let me go over some measurements of success. How do we know our discussions are successful? What do we want as instructors? We want to see that the work's been completed and understood. We want to see the quality of student interactions is high, that there's a high level of participation, the number of students, the timeliness of their posts, and also replies, that there's college-level discourse, and there's the ability to explain their thoughts in writing. And we're going to try to move quickly through this part because we want to get to a lot of our ideas too. But Anne's going to weigh in next.
Oops, hold on, wrong thing. Okay, so measures of success, and again, I think for developmental teachers, we need to understand that we are planting seeds that will not grow right away. So it's not anything that you can see in black and white all the time, but certainly all of the things on this list are really important. I find that if the students feel really attached or they have something to say, this discussion will really be lively. And I've noticed that in English 090, and I'm noticing it in certain discussions in this class. The discussions where they have to do a lot of work before they post and they don't really understand the content, it's really, those can be deadly. And I'm still struggling with that. And I do post a lot in those discussions to make sure that they do get it. And again, I've talked about the college level discourse and the ability to explain thoughts in writing. And that comes back to some of the questions that people have asked about how to help struggling students. And I find that to be really difficult. If I think a student is really struggling, and you can tell in the way they post in the discussions, their grammar, but also in what they send to the Dropbox, and I really try to encourage them to use the OTL so that they can get some help with their skills. But what I do when I'm trying to look beyond the bad grammar to the seed of what they're saying and find a way to really encourage them, because it's not necessarily their fault that they don't know how to do it. And sometimes students sneak in, even with the active places. So that's the best I can say about that. I think I answered all the questions I wanted to. So back to me. Okay, so the strategies to improve the quality of discussions. And this Instructor Presence, you know, we were evaluated on that with Q&A, which I understand is changing. But to me, I don't feel right if I don't check it every day on discussions, even on the weekend. But I know that not everybody can do that. But I feel like sometimes it's such a tenuous thread that connects us to the students for many reasons, time, their level of engagement. So I would say the most important thing to do is to kind of try to stick to a schedule, or just find the way that of interacting and on a time basis that you can feel like you are tied to them and that they know that you will be there. And that's really idealistic, but that's what I try to do. Setting expectations, again, letting them know for grammar if their content isn't sufficient, that sort of thing, and just doing it in the replies, if possible, doing it via email if not possible. The questions that allow success, my urge is sometimes to want to tweak certain questions, but I think if they were just kindly tweaked would be, I would get what I'm looking for. But this is something that we can't really do. I did get permission to make a change. But what you could do, and I thought about doing, is to add, after the discussion, to just add a little thing of things they need to be aware of if you know that you're always getting issues. Because the pinned posts don't show up until they post it. So if you want to let them know something, you have to do it somehow, which is a conundrum. We talked about addressing incomplete posts. Selecting a part of the post and asking them to elaborate is critical, but also to praise to the skies, you know, if they said something in a really good way, anything that will get them to believe more in themselves. The art of questioning, and I like Carol's idea of using words from Bloom that are very, very clear, and I've worked over the last 3 years on being as clear as I possibly can. And I think they appreciate that, and they also learn something from how we deliver our messages. Positive aspects we've talked about, and then using the Teaching Excellence website is critical. So Carol, I'm going back to you. Some dead space here. Carol, are you still connected?
So sorry, I forgot to turn on my microphone.
Sorry, I screwed up. Sorry.
No, that was me. I didn't turn on my microphone. But for Instructor Presence, I just wanted to say that that is something that every instructor has to look at how they want to do it. But I do reply to every student for their initial thread, and I look through the discussion, make sure I've done that, and I either reply back that their first post is complete, or that they maybe need to do a revision or add something. And whenever there's a revision, I always make sure I point out some things I thought they did really well. So I never try to put just a negative post. I always put a positive, and then maybe ask them to revise something. And then for my schedule, I usually check my discussions every day. I do try to give myself Sundays off, and I think that's a good thing, but it helps to let the students know that maybe you're not going to be working on Sundays, and that's maybe a day that you try to take off. So if you do have a schedule, it helps to let your students know when they might see you or might not see you in a discussion. And I wanted to talk about the expectations just slightly. When you set the expectations and you've given them directions, especially for our developmental ed kids, sometimes I call them kids because I've taught middle school and high school, and I mean adults, but our students, we will, sometimes I'll post like the directions in the brief as a pinned post, or I might do a sample post from a previous student from another class, and I just kind of put their initials and say, this is from one of my previous students about this discussion, and it gives them an idea of what a really good discussion post might look like, and sometimes that helps guide them along. And then the other one I want to talk about a little bit is the art of questioning. And sometimes we have to look at our questions and make sure that there's not one answer. If we want discussion, a lot of times we need to do open-ended questions. So instead of saying, you know, what color is this rose, and showing them a picture, you'd be saying, what color could roses be? And there's lots of different colors that it could be. So you want a question that will have an open-ended response, where there could be lots of answers. So think about your questions and try to have some sort of question where there's lots of possible responses, and then students feel more empowered with those questions because there's lots of things that they could say that are right versus one right answer and lots of wrong answers. And then Bloom's taxonomy, if you haven't lately, it might be good to pull up a Bloom's taxonomy on the internet and kind of take out some of those verbs and, you know, ask students to maybe use some of these in their replies. Maybe create, evaluate, compare. Those are all higher levels of critical thinking, and encourage your students to do those things. And that's what I wanted to say on that slide. So we're going to go to our next one. And this is for you, Anne.
Thank you. So the pinned posts, I think, are really critical. If I'm seeing a certain pattern in the discussion and I want to address everybody, I will use a pinned post. But another way I think is really effective is if you take like Johnny, Joe, and Mary that say similar things and try to enlarge on that and try to get that to go deeper. And if they see their name in one of my posts, then I think they might be more likely to want to participate further and go deeper, but also that, you know, it's like feeling good about yourself if somebody's noticing what you're doing. Let's see, that was Bloom we talked about. The clarity about how often they should be in discussions is really important. I do send them emails if they're not participating, and I will put in a pinned post, you know, what it's so quiet in here. And a lot of times somebody will post when I do that. And then we do have the first post due halfway, and we do contact students who are not participating. So I'm all set there, Carol. Back to you.
I think I've already talked about some of the things on here, but one thing I wanted to mention real quick was on, I think it helps, especially our developmental ed students, to let them know how often they should be in the discussions. The discussion is an ongoing thing, and so if you tell them, you know, you should post your initial thread by the due date, and then you should check the discussion at least twice after your initial thread. And those numbers and sometimes that expectation just needs to be set, and I think they'll follow it a little bit better. And having that first post due halfway, I've found has been critical. That's really important to keep an online discussion going. So if you don't have that, that's something that would be one of my biggest suggestions, is having their initial post due halfway, and then having at least one other reply and another, you know, another point. I'm going to go to the next screen. And we did want to point out that our CCC Online has several sites for us to look at that do help. So if you're struggling with discussions, sometimes it's helpful just to go to these and just really get this fresh in your mind again. And I'm going to push out a PDF of all the PowerPoint slides to you, and so at the end, and so we'll have these websites if you don't have them. But if you go to CCC Online and look up the discussions and evaluations, this first website is a rubric on how we're graded. And so this is your expectations. This is what the Q&A is looking at, and this is what you should be doing here for your classes. And in that, it talks about some of the things that you talked about, such as replying. I know the introduction, they want everyone to reply to. And it also talks about open-ended questions and things like that that we've mentioned, and higher order thinking skills. The second website, if you want to look at that one, is some discussion examples. And sometimes if you want to liven up our discussions, or you have a discussion in your course that's just not where you want it to be, or doesn't get the participation that you want, you might look at some of those discussion examples and see if that helps you create something that might be more appropriate. And each department's a little different, so if you want to change a discussion, you might just check with your department head if needed. I know in math we have a little bit of freedom to change some of our discussions as long as we keep it to our content and rigor that we have, but you might just check with your department chair if you're not sure on changing your discussions in your course. And then the last one is just some frequently asked questions about discussions and evaluations, so that might be another good resource for you. And our next slide, we have about 8 minutes left. We want to make sure we leave some time for some comments and questions, and so we wanted to just mention this because grading discussions is kind of a questionable thing for some students and some instructors. So sometimes it helps posting how you grade your discussion in advance or at the beginning of the discussion, so they know. It could be a pinned post. But if you'd like more information about grading practices, we invite you to email one of us at any point. And if you're English or social sciences, your questions might be better answered by Anne O'Brien. And if you're math sciences, typically those questions would be more in line, and maybe email me, Carol Kramer. And I just posted that discussion grade report because that's kind of a general outline that I post in their comments when I grade it. And sometimes I'll put that in the beginning at some point in the discussion or at the beginning of the course. They kind of know how their discussions are graded, because sometimes the grade is a mystery on when they see their number. So, Anne, did you want to say anything on this slide?
Yes, I do. So in English, so I don't teach social sciences. I'm just developmental English and composition, but that would be nice to teach that too. We have a rubric in our course. We have rubrics for everything, and so the students can look at the rubric. I do refer to it, and so they shouldn't know exactly what is going on, the way this course is developed. I think my course is, if it's not a master course, it's close to it. And of course, our discussions are worth 10 points. So that's it for me. So maybe we could get on to more tips or discussions that people might have. So and this is just summarizing what is the purpose, what is my part, and what are your strategies. If there's anything you want to add or ask a question about, let's do that now. Am I coming across, I'm hearing background noise, but
coming across well, Anne. As people might be typing in, if you could type in, do you have another idea or strategies that has helped you with one of the issues that we talked about today? If you want to type that in, we'd appreciate sharing that with everybody else. And also don't forget our discussion forum that we can talk to, which is our community at CCC Online. So a lot of times we can bounce ideas off of each other and work with each other also. And two things I just want to just summarize is our purpose for discussions. We want to build our students' content skills, their critical thinking, and ability to communicate through online media. And sometimes we just make sure that the students understand that also. Do they know the purpose of our discussions? And then your part with discussions, be present, and Anne really wanted to make sure we have the patience, because it is a growth process. And so hopefully you can see growth between the beginning of the semester and the end of the semester with each student, and give feedback, not just negative, but positive and negative with each of your replies. Do quality questions and have clear expectations. And I do see a couple things in chat. From Anne, said, what are the grammar, spelling expectations of other math teachers in written communication? There are times when I can barely read the quote. That's, I think, the quality and what you expect, I think, will go down to the individual instructors. But I, as a math teacher, I need it